All of this footage was shot on one cinema camera that just had a significant price reduction, making it, in my opinion, the best budget cinema camera of 2023. But before we get into this video, I just want to let you guys know that we are doing a giveaway for a Comica wireless microphone, and all you have to do is like and subscribe to the channel and comment down below, "Can you hear me now?" and you will be eligible to win one of these for free, no strings attached. Now, this camera that we're talking about is slammed with features. It has a Super 35 sensor, 13 stops dynamic range, dual native ISO of 400 and 3200. It has the ability to shoot 6K at 60 frames per second, and it has the ability to supply phantom power to your microphone. And the camera that we're talking about today is the 6K Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. And you get all of this brand new for under $1,600. Now, when we're talking about Blackmagic cameras, there's two things that stand out to me: the interface and the color science. The color science of Blackmagic cameras is absolutely incredible. The skin tones and the depth of color that you're able to achieve with this little beast of a camera, in my opinion, blows anything in this price range out of the water. The other thing that I love about Blackmagic cameras in general is the interface. It is extremely user-friendly and easy to learn. You could pick this camera up, learn the interface in just a few hours, be able to comfortably use this camera on set. This camera has the ability to shoot ProRes and B-roll, which allows you to adjust things like color temperature, ISO, and toggling the LUTs on and off. The camera has the ability to record on several different media types, CFast cards, and a USB-C, which you can use on an external SSD. Now, I will say, depending on the compression rate that you shoot on, the media that you will need will vary. For example, I used the 2TB external hard drive at the lowest compression rate of 3.1, and that would give me about 90 minutes shooting 6K at 24 frames, which for 2TB is not a ton of recording time. So I would imagine that if you were using a 1TB CFast card, you could only film for about 45 minutes on the lowest compression rate, just doing 6K at 24 frames. And I could also imagine for some filmmakers, that's not really an option. For me, as a documentary filmmaker, being able to only record 45 minutes at a time, it was just not worth it to me. I know that having that extra 45 minutes to me was a big deal, and that's why I ended up using a 2TB SSD. If you're okay shooting at the higher compression rate at 5.1, 8.1, or even 12.1, then you definitely will get more time out of your media. But you just have to remember that the higher the compression rate, the lower the quality of footage. Me personally, I didn't like shooting above 5.1. I thought that 8.1 or even 12.1, I just found that the quality of footage, especially when you start compressing it to other social media platforms, you definitely saw the footage break down a little bit. One of the biggest cons for me of this camera was the fact that they use LP batteries, which, depending on how bright your monitor is or the settings on your camera, each battery will take anywhere between 25, maybe 30 minutes max to kill. But if you don't mind swapping those out, maybe that's not a big deal for you. For me, I like at least having a good 45 minutes to an hour before I have to switch out batteries. So that's why I opted to go with a V mount. So my suggestion, if you're thinking about getting this camera, is to get an external V mount battery. And this allowed me to run my camera for a long time, probably somewhere around the time of like 4 to 6 hours, which in my case was plenty enough. Looking at this camera, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a pocket cinema camera, because it's definitely too big to fit in your pocket and bigger than most DSLRs. But I will say that the camera itself, just the body, is pretty lightweight and it is sturdy. So even if you are thinking about adding a few components to your rig, it won't be too heavy or too bulky. I would still consider it a great running gun camera, but is it a pocket cinema camera? No, you're not fitting this thing into your pocket unless you're a giant. Now, I will say that using this camera without a cage, in my opinion, makes it way more complicated, because if you're looking to add a V-mount battery or an external SSD to get more memory or more time out of your camera, you're gonna need to get yourself a cage, which means that you're gonna need to get a bottom plate and the rails to hold the V-mount battery. And then you're also gonna need, a little side handle to hold on to the SSD. It starts to become less of a running gun camera and more like a cinema rig. Pretty quickly, you're gonna up the weight on this camera. But I have seen other people attach a V-mount battery just to the bottom of the camera and use the SSD as just like a shoe mount on the top of the camera. And that's pretty cool. I find that it looks a little bit wonky, and I opted in just to get a whole cage and just rig it out like a cinema camera. And I actually didn't mind the weight of of it at all. Another big con about this camera is the fact that it uses a rolling shutter. And I found that to be slightly noticeable when you are trying to capture fast moving objects at 6K. And I will say it progressively gets worse as you go down in resolution on the camera. So if you're at 5K, it gets a little bit more noticeable. And then if you're at like 4 or 2K, it starts becoming significantly noticeable. So if you find yourself wanting to film in 4K more often than not, then that might be a concern for you. Like I said before, this camera has a dual native ISO of 400 and 3200. At 400 ISO, you get a very clean image. However, when you start getting into the higher ISOs, especially above 1600, you start introducing a lot of noise into the image. So if you're someone that is looking for really high performance in a low light situation, this might not be the camera for you. The screen on the Pocket Cinema camera is definitely big, especially when compared to DSLR cameras. But for me, I found it to be just a little bit too small to monitor things like focus and my overall image. And the bad thing about this monitor is that it doesn't pull out of the camera. It's kind of stuck to the camera. So if you're in a weird angle where you're kind of holding it out either below you or up above you, it's hard to be able to monitor your image because it's just attached to the camera. So what I would suggest is to get yourself a monitor anywhere between 5 to 7 inches just to be able to have the ability to tilt it or move it around or have it on an arm. Because when I did rely on this monitor, a lot of the times I missed focus or my composition was just a little bit off, or there was something in my frame that I didn't notice because it is just a little bit smaller. But when you compare this screen to normal DSLRs, it's at least 2 or 3 times as big. There are a lot of cameras in this price point, and it's really awesome for filmmakers, especially now, that have all of these cameras in this really low price point that can actually get you really cinematic footage, like the Sigma FP and the Lumix GH5, which both in their own right are absolutely great cameras. But the fact that this camera has the ability to shoot 6K at 60 frames, 13 stops of dynamic range, and supplies phantom power to your microphone, in my opinion, it makes this camera very hard to beat and probably the best bang for your buck option when it comes to cinema cameras. I think this is an amazing camera for filmmakers that want to take their first step into cinema cameras without breaking the bank. If you're a DSLR user and you're looking to level up to the next step, in my opinion, this is a great option and starting point, especially for the price of $1,595. And the truth is, you could probably find this camera closer to $1,000 on eBay if you don't mind buying it a little used. Now, that being said, this camera comes in just under $1,600 for the base starting point. Very quickly, you can get yourself up to that $2,000 mark just by buying a V-mount battery and an SSD. And if you're looking for a whole rig build out, you know, that could cost anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000 easy. But even with all that being considered, this camera punches way above its weight when you consider the price that you're actually getting it for. I have had the pleasure of using this camera for a few years, and if it wasn't for all my gear getting stolen when I did a shoot out in San Francisco, I would probably still be using this camera today. And if you guys want to see that crazy shit show, check out this video right here. That was just wild. I can't even believe I got all my gear stolen. When I tell you, like, every single piece of gear I owned, every piece of gear I owned. Now, with all of this being said, I just want to give you guys a quick reminder that this is just gear, man. This is just one little part of filmmaking. It's not the most important thing. You don't have to go out and buy the most expensive gear. And even if you don't have the money to buy this camera, there's a ton of really great cameras that you could probably go find on eBay that are beat up and used, but you can get your hands on them and start building your skills, because that's the most important thing. You know, like, you take your camera, you learn it like the back of your hand, you get really, really good at it, and you earn the right to go up and buy that next upgrade, you know? Don't worry about buying the latest gear and spending a ton of money on gear. It's really about growing your skills and being able to get what you can afford and just start moving, just start making stuff, creating stuff, get clients, learn, fail, do all of that before you go out and invest every dollar you have in a camera. Make sure that you invest in yourself and invest in your process and invest in your education first. I do a ton of videos on my channel talking about, you know, the process of filmmaking. So check some of those videos out, man. And thank you so much for watching, talking about this really awesome camera. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Deuces.